Whatever it is, they're evaluating us. I was not respectful to you.
Well, now I know I'm not crazy.
Do you want to know if you've been missed?
You can't just do that.
You know I'm not allowed to talk about what I hear in there.
Mommy doesn't like to eat.
This could be the end of the world, and you could go to hell.
I can't believe that's the way God is.
I know something I think you should know.
Certainly is an ambitious way of thinking about things.
Because he loves this room and hearing his own voice and saving the day.
If the world is still here on Monday, we can talk.
Welcome to Mad Men, the weekly show where we discuss a show that used to come out weekly. Each week, we take a close look at an episode of the AMC series Mad Men, which ran from 2007 to 2015, and we gear our conversation around the conversation the show is having about gender, the patriarchy, and, well, this little thing that's going on in Cuba right now, but we don't have to talk about it too specifically. I'm John Negroni, and Will Ashton. Are you concerned about your appearance? You've been blessed with a very resilient podcast.
Hey, John. I'm excited.
You're excited, and we have somebody else here who's missed the last couple of weeks. And so Mike Overholtz, other than your podcast and a haircut, is there anything new I need to know about?
I gave away your baby. I'm not perfect, John.
Oh, well, I guess that makes my love confession a little bit more awkward. But guys, here's what's not awkward. We finished season 2 of Mad Men. We're 2 out of 7 seasons completed. In fact, I was just thinking about this. We are about 5 or 6 episodes away from being halfway done with this podcast. How do you feel about that?
That feels wrong.
Well, there's 7 seasons, and once we get to 3.5 seasons, that's halfway, isn't it?
No.
Is my math wrong? I mean, that could be the case. Like, what?
You're just wrong.
It's wrong? Oh, okay. Well, I guess I can't argue with that.
I mean,
dead
that might
logic
be
there.
That might be true, but I feel like we won't finish this podcast until 2026 at the rate we're going at this time.
Will, you're not much of a believer then, but that's okay. We are finishing season 2 this week, Meditations in an Emergency. Like last season, this is an episode directed by Matthew Weiner. He co-writes this time with Cater Gordon. You'll remember in The Wheel, which was episode 13 of last season, he co-wrote that episode with Robin Bythe, and not this episode, Meditations in an Emergency. A lot of people call this the best episode of season 2, but do you two agree with that? Before you give me your opinions, we'll just say real quick, this episode covers a lot of stuff, including, Don Draper. He's back at Sterling Cooper. There's the fallout of the Powell, Putnam, and Lowe merger. Betty finds out that she's pregnant, and Pete and Peggy, that's a weird combination of their names. Pete goes to Peggy about how he really feels. And we also get the return of Colin Hanks. I didn't have the heart to tell you, Will, that Colin Hanks was back in this episode, which I assumed would be a plus for you.
Well, you set me up to fail, I guess, or not set me up to fail. You set my expectations wrong because you said my favorite character would be coming back in this episode. And I got all excited because I was like, Chauncey's back. And he's now the head of accounts
Chauncey
for the competition. I can't wait to see what he's up to. And of course,
if Duck's not going to be president of Sterling Cooper.
Well, that's what I was hoping for, when they were having that meeting and the Brits were like, they excuse him after he has his little tirade, and they're like,
right.
Obviously, we can't rely on Duck. He's too unstable. He can't hold his liquor. But I know exactly a man for the job. And we see like a close up on the paws walking into the and we see the tail wagging like these and even though it wouldn't be time appropriate, we have what's that song called? I guess we can do Who Let the Dogs Out.
Sing it.
No.
Who Let the Dogs Out, huh?
Yeah, sure. That wasn't the song I was thinking of, but
I was thinking of Gangsters in Paradise. Sure, you said it, but unfortunately, they leave that for the deleted scenes. Maybe they'll open season 3 with that. Will, you can look forward to that. I'll start with you, Mike, because you haven't been around. Generally, how did you feel about the last part of this season? Really, like the last 3 episodes all put together.
I really enjoy them. I mean, it's doing a weekly podcast like this. These last 3 episodes are really tough to watch individually.
Yes.
I'll be honest, I didn't. I watched all 3 of them twice.
You're a simple man. You just gave in to your pleasures. You're a regular Draper.
What can I say?
You were sitting at the bar and these episodes ordered you a gimlet and you were like, well, I guess I'll go over to this room and wait for the episodes to come meet you.
I mean, we were trying to make it like the headcanon that you were in LA doing, your own thing while we were struggling to do this podcast the last couple of weeks. So
yeah, we landed the popsicle account, Mike.
You're like Don with like a big paperwork, piled up on his desk. You're just like, well, let's see what we got here. The Cuban
you also
Missile
earned $500,000, Mike, just by being gone the last couple of weeks.
Oh, also, Atomic Dog by George Clinton was a song I was thinking of before.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
Will, did you ever think I left you here with John because I thought you could handle it?
I love that line.
Well, what do I say?
Such bullshit.
Yeah.
You rehearse that shit on the plane.
Right.
And it's like,
oh yeah, Pete's gonna give you so much crap about this. Yeah.
It's also not suave at all. It's not like classic like Don Draper, just like really smoothing over. But Pete just so desperately wanted to get that validation. He was like, that's exactly what happened.
Like Don accidentally wins constantly in this episode, just like by pure dumb luck, honestly. Down to like the fact that like Betty takes him back because of just kind of dumb luck, honestly. Like the Cuban Missile Crisis is kind of what spurs it on, you could argue.
He wrote a pretty good note.
I thought it was kind of weak, to be honest. I felt like she was reading that and was just like, all right, whatever. Like, is he going to keep writing notes like this? Okay. Actually, what is your read on that, Mike? Do you think the letter really did bring her back?
No, not at all. I think her feeling like she got one over on Dawn is going to keep that secret. I think the fact that she lied to Dawn when she said things have been easier without him. I don't think she actually wants to raise that baby alone. And I think she just maybe pitied him in that moment when like the whole note's right. Like you can move on and be fine. I'm not. I'll be alone. And I don't think any of it was her actually wanting Dawn. She's not even happy when he comes and sits down on the couch. She's just like, okay, it's my life.
I feel like for her, it was just like she just needed that gesture to like rationalize it. It wasn't like an emotional sort of like, oh, like she doesn't swoon for it. You'll notice too, like the first season, you have more of that emotion, love that she has for him. But yeah, by this point, it's gone. But do you disagree, Will? We haven't heard what you think of these episodes. Well, we know what you think of the last two episodes, but this episode.
Well, I was going to ask you guys, like, you like, how seriously do you think she was contemplating getting the abortion? I mean, it seemed like at the beginning that she was like pretty
at least 50-50, if not more.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like in that opening scene, it seemed like pretty like I'm doing this, doctor be damned. And then, she had like an out to do it. Like, obviously when she dropped the kids off, she knew the location of the abortion clinic or the, whatever it would be. And yeah, like she had a way to do it and Dawn didn't know at that point. And, it probably wouldn't have gotten to him. But I do think it's interesting that rather than, do that, she kind of wanted to live out this fantasy that Dawn's been living behind her back for so long, kind of have them switch roles where she gets with this guy who's like clearly like kind of like the Dawn Draper type, quote unquote, who has like all like the things that she likes from Dawn before without any of the commitment or ties or the baggage that they now have in their relationship. So, I mean, I don't know. It's interesting to be sure. But to answer your question that you asked, I enjoyed it. I feel like I didn't like this episode as much as the season 1 finale, which I felt like maybe was a little bit stronger with the carousel. And
it does end with Bob Dylan, which is kind of hard to top too.
Yeah, I mean, I was excited. Scene. They finally, lived up to that promise after, teasing on the previous episode and not delivering. But
before you go on, well, I do got to ask real quick. I mean, is your read then that you think for her, like having sex with somebody like a meaningless fling made her connect with like, oh, this is how Don feels. It's not that he actually like wants anyone else. He just probably just did it and it didn't mean anything. And do you think that's more like where her head's at?
Yeah.
As a possibility?
I mean, I think it's part of it to be sure. And I don't even know if that's really the case with Don. Like, I think he does get something out of the affairs that we've seen him have on the show. And
I think she got something out of that affair too, but maybe it just was like, like she had more of like a crystallizing. Oh, so this is why he does it because of the power or something.
I mean, and I think that's kind of a false perception, but I think that is in part like what she feels that he gets out of it. Like, it's like, okay, like he doesn't love someone else. He's kind of likes to get his rocks off, behind my back. It's
interesting.
I don't know. This whole season, she's just been so sad and so horny. It was nice to her, finally get some action. And I think her and Dawn had sex before when they were at their parents, but meaningful sex, even though it wasn't actually with meaning in a way. But
look, it has been verified. It's canon that Don Draper is good at sex, and he likes doing it.
Sure,
he has a bit of a reputation. I wonder if for Betty it was just like, man, he is pretty good at it, and so I don't want to lose that dick. And little does she know that that has two meanings.
Yeah. Very good.
Anyway, Will, you were talking about your overall thoughts in the episode, and I cut you off very rudely. I mansplained you, so I apologize.
Sure.
Sort of
speculating on how big Dawn's dick is and all that. I get it.
Mm-hmm. Some things take precedent. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. What are you thinking?
I forgot. You haven't seen season 4. That'll be
canon. Yeah. That'll come in episode 5, season 12.
It comes in multiple episodes, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
At the same time, yeah.
I hope it's like a throwaway line, like Roger's just like, Dawn, I know you are a 5.4, man. And, it just kind of casually comes out, and I'm like, oh, okay. And then someone updates the Mad Men wiki.
It's like, I didn't know measuring tape, existed in 1960.
Yeah.
So I love this episode because I think this episode has so much more drive and energy and purpose compared to the last one. Just the whole sequence of Dawn coming back to Sterling Cooper and that return, and how everybody reacts to him being back, Pete kind of coming into his office like we talked about, how everyone has their own sort of really correspondence or rapport with him. I love Peggy getting to that off the office to him. It's so great. And his reaction, you'll notice that he's the only one who really notices her hair, that it's a haircut. Because everybody else was just sort of like Paul and Pete were something's different about you. What? And you just see Dawn sees her. He knows her well enough to be like, oh yeah, you changed your hair, which to us is kind of ridiculous. Who wouldn't have noticed that? She's had the same hairstyle in the show for years. But I just that pride you can see on his face for his protege is definitely a highlight of this episode for me.
I have to agree with Will, though. I do generally enjoy season 1 finale more than I enjoy season 2. I just find that season 1 on its own was so good, and I could watch season 1 as its own thing forever and ever. Season 2, I know you talked about it, John, in the beginning, just feeling of it's a little bit slower. It's not your favorite season. But what this does is this catalyst for what the rest of the show is. And so I do enjoy that here at the end of season 2 because I know what's coming. It's this is the big bang for what the rest of Mad Men is, right?
It's a transition season. It's because we talked about it last season, when we finished, that the first season, Weiner had a lot of time to really figure out what he wanted to do. He made it purposely standalone. And so season 2 kind of was a different version of season 1. It was a new season 1 in some ways. They were experimenting with, okay, what else can this show be? What can we take that worked really well in season 1 and then add to that? So in this season, you have a lot of swings, which I think a lot of people respect this season for that. They like how far it goes in some ways, the jet set being a notable example. But yeah, you can kind of see the clumsiness a little bit, the sort of stumbling around in the dark, before they really find the light switch that I think, in my opinion, is going to turn on for season 3 and then on. But for sure, I think that this episode, I compare it more readily to Nixon versus Kennedy. Because that episode, the background of everything happening is the political stuff with the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I don't love the Cuban Missile Crisis stuff in this episode. Honestly, I think, if anything, the metaphor of it is too heavy-handed and it takes away from, I think, the drama, which is inherently interesting on its own. Because, the whole thing is there's this dark thing happening in the background. The world could end. There's a line that I think you in particular, Will Ashton, should keep in mind as somebody who's watching this for the first time, we think, that this idea of the end of the world that got brought up in the last season, and then it got brought up again in this episode. It's just a little cue. I just hope those words resonate with you because it's relevant for the show.
Well, to answer the initial conversation point, I do think while I probably prefer season 1, and my opinion could certainly change on this, I do admire the swings that are taken in season 2. I think I respect season 2 more than season 1 in that sense, but I do think I got more out of the first season than the second comparatively. But I do think, every time we would sit down and talk about these episodes, I think the conversation became richer because the show became deliberately messier, more complex, more, mature, more willing to kind of dive into the psyche of these characters in a way that felt more ambitious and, not always looking for a clean, easy resolve in a way that I feel like the first season could be a little pat at times. In some of their writing choices. But I mean, I will say that, as far as the Cuban Missile Crisis plot, I think it's good as far as like establishing that, like, obviously Dawn in the past 2 episodes had this sort of like kind of childlike mentality in the sense of like was willing to kind of go into life anew in the way that he's used to, and able to kind of like put life aside and divorce and become his like truest self in some respects, like the truest Dick Whitman that would exist at this time. And I feel like the Cuban Missile Crisis allows everyone else to kind of have a similar mentality in the sense of like they become a little bit more fight and flight. Like the world could end tomorrow, so like we see the truest versions of each of these characters in a lot of ways.
Well, to that point, you can see that like Don and Pete seem to be the calmest about it because they were the ones who watched that presentation 2 episodes ago.
Right.
Like they've had more time to sort of process the reality that the Sputnik, Russians, the space race, all that stuff has kind of come back. It was ready and prevalent in the 50s. Is also happening again now, and they're kind of a little bit more realistic, and they're not panicking.
But they seem to kind of take the opposite approach, whereas like Don is taking the time to kind of like find himself, fix himself, and then eventually rekindle his family life and his personal life.
He's being rational. He's not just sort of being reactionary to the current events.
Pete is like dismantling his personal life in the pursuit of building his personal or his professional life, in a more present and active way.
Right. Yeah. He wants a refresh. He wants like a resurrection. Like he just wants to like toss Trudy out and try something different.
Yeah. Poor Trudy.
Oh yeah. Trudy doesn't deserve any of that whatsoever. Okay. I wanted to bring this up because, Father Gill. Father Gill is back. He has like one last pitch to Peggy, and I got to look at you, Mike, because I know Mike,
the classic Catholic
Mike,
guilt.
You're a fan of Catholic guilt, right, Mike? I know I'm asking you and not the person who's raised Catholic, but
yeah, huge fan of it. I think that's the great thing about religion. You always have that hell trump card. What are you gonna do? You want to be tortured for eternity?
Because, like, I know neither of us were raised Catholic, Mike, but I mean, we've been through that, right? Where we've been in that sort of like using current events to like scare you into like making religious change. It's kind of a real thing, huh?
Yeah, I think both of us can speak from our college experiences, and that was a very prevalent thing in a lot of the courses I took, and the kind of religion that was taught there. And it's how can you just can't take a person seriously when like that's their logic.
See, I was just imagining this was like any course, like geometry, and just like put this together, all that. It doesn't matter. You're gonna burn hell if you don't follow God's word. But keep in mind
that off, Will. But Mike's alluding to the fact that we did take courses at the same college. That is a very religious, fundamental, evangelical college, and it's actually not fiction, Will. But
I just have to say,
that,
Jesus Christ.
I've always thought it's kind of weird. This is kind of pivoting a little bit, but I think it's weird the way that Don phrases, the way he chooses to phrase his admission that he had an affair. He says, I wasn't respectful to you. And that seems to work. And like, that seems to be enough for her because she's just like, oh, like there seems to be like a little bit of relief that flickers in her eyes. But like, I feel like the episode or the show is trying to say like that's brave of him or something, but like I don't think so. Maybe that's my modern, kind of looking at it. But how is that brave? Like he's just being like a chicken. Like he won't actually like fess up like he did this, and I don't get why Betty isn't demanding more from him.
Because the problem with having an affair, and like I feel like especially in those times when we talk about this a lot in season 1, where it's all about perception of the family and keeping the family core strong. The problem with an affair isn't that you went and you did this. I feel like honestly, maybe Betty could give a shit about the sex of it all. I think she just would care and would be more mad that, what if people found out? How embarrassing that would be for her. He didn't take her into consideration in that regard. That is the problem with the affair, is that he was being disrespectful to her.
So do you think that's why the letter had enough of an effect, because it was kind of leaning off of that, like he's respecting her, like, buttering her up essentially by being like, you'll be fine, you'll find something great?
I think the letter is like a check mark. Like you're trying to get your passport and you have to have your forms filled out and picture
Betty,
in the right format.
Without emotion, like checks the thing, be like, yeah, enjoy this country that is my body. Yeah.
Exactly. Like he wrote it on hotel paper. Like he didn't even take, I don't know.
Off a whim. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know he's a writer, and maybe to Betty, she was just like, hell, he's writing something and for once sharing his gift with me. I think it's poorly written, personally.
Oof. I guess I had...
You don't think so, Will?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to criticize the letter.
I am.
Well, you can. That's your right.
That's an obvious first draft if I ever read it.
Oh, sure, yeah. But I think for me, my read's a little bit different than yours, Mike, and maybe yours, John, in that, like, to me, I think even though Don's not being entirely forward, like he's sugarcoating it and all that, I think Betty is just relieved that he's actually being honest for once. And that, like, even if he's not saying the thing, he's admitting that what she's been feeling is the truth. And like, he's not trying to like gaslight her or like,
boyfriend of the year. He apologized.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he did like the simple thing, to be sure, but I think that's what Betty finds relief in. But as far as the letter and all that is concerned, I think it's less that she finds comfort in his words and more that, similar to the couple scenes before where the position has been switched, like now Don's, humbling himself and he's like, in the position where he's putting Betty in power. And obviously just before that, she was living out the Dawn fantasy with this, would-be Dawn type that, she's living the life that he's been living behind her back for so long. And then subsequently Dawn's the one that has to, take care of the kids, be, in the dark completely about this and all this stuff. And I think that's where she finds the satisfaction, is that she can kind of like hold the trump card in that respect.
The bar is so low, but I mean, I think you're right. Mike, when you were saying like for the time, this does like kind of speak more volumes than it would now. And that is something I appreciate about how the show sort of uses that, not to shock the people watching, but to kind of get you in the mind space of the people in the show, which I guess is where some of the criticism of the show comes from, where people are like, oh, if you watch Mad Men, you might sort of like absorb some of like the values that it's not necessarily praising, but just sort of depicting. And I think that in that case, I think people should just always watch things with a careful and sharp mind.
I mean,
but yeah,
that's even going back to like the Sopranos thing, where people thought like it was endorsing violence and mob culture and not critiquing it or analyzing it.
Which is, I found that so weird when I was coming across those takes, because in my context, like watching the whole show front to back, I was just like, this is such a like critique on like, masculinity and how all that begets mob violence and all that. But anyway, in terms of Mad Men,
I do want to just to strengthen my argument. Do you remember what Betty told Dawn when she found out the neighbor husband was having an affair?
Yeah.
How could he do this to her?
Right.
It was all about him doing it to her.
Yeah. I guess that's why like you can look at it as sort of like, what is the thing that offends her the most? And I think like what you're saying, Mike, is like what offends her is like if people found out, like the reputation. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because like we've seen Betty sort of use that. I guess sometimes I wonder, is like, is that like a shield kind of covering up an even deeper insecurity that she has? Like what is it about that reputation, that losing that artifice that she has, that like she is scared of the most? And I think it has something to do with her mother, this idea of like, she feels like she's going to be an orphan and she's going to be alone. Like she's been really lonely. Like, isn't that what she kind of said to Glenn, in the last season? She felt so alone because she, I think that her fear of not having a family is just like, so like, and then that kind of speaks to how maybe she does feel like with Dawn not around, it hasn't been that different because she has her kids and she's been able to take care of them. She's been able to just take the paychecks and go with it. And, she doesn't really need Dawn necessarily. So it makes this episode even more fascinating, what she decides to do.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that just comes down to like she just finally has the power in the relationship in a way that she's never really had before. But also, I think there's some truth in the sense of like, she still has her father weighing on her mind. The fact that she is, like, even though she isn't fully an orphan yet, like her father is, riddled by this horrible disease, and she feels kind of orphanized because of that at this point. So there is that sense of like losing that stability and having an opportunity to have that again with Dawn, especially if she's going to be having another child. I think there is some truth to that as well.
Yeah. I didn't have anything else on that. I feel like we covered it. So I want to talk about Pete. Pete has a lot of stuff going on in this episode, and it's like the culmination of a lot of like Pete kind of going up to Peggy and trying to like talk to her, and her kind of like brushing him off. What do we think about this scene where he kind of gets stressed down? I've always found his reaction to the whole thing really interesting, because it's like, it looks like he's almost like a little bit vulnerable, like a little bit like, I guess like you would expect maybe part of the scene to be him sort of like, I have a child out there. And that's sort of like really speaking to him in a very like confusing way, because this is also an episode about how Pete, or sorry, not just Pete, but like a lot of the characters are sort of like reflecting on parental relationships. In this case, like Pete kind of choosing Dawn over Duck and feeling like Dawn is more of like a father figure to him. And obviously like Duck realizing that Chauncey is his father figure, but he realized it too late, right?
I mean, similar to, Pete in an indirect way, he kind of lost that child, in a way that he, had control over, but didn't really understand. Right. In that respect, Pete has lost his child that he just never really knew or knew he had. And he's similar to feeling that
honestly,
guilt.
Yes, exactly. And I think that is one of the arcs in season 2 that I think is the strongest, is Pete. I feel like they put a lot of work into that. I know, but like the fact, like the way he loses his dad, the adoption stuff, the courting of Peggy, and the irony of that. I actually do think a lot of the Pete stuff this season is strong, because I don't think they overdid it. But I don't know if you guys disagree.
No, I think Pete is extremely interesting in this season, right? Because he's so unlikable in the first season, and the second season, what was it? I think you said it in our very first episode ever, John, that Pete Campbell is all of us. And that's just all they're doing. They've just continued to humanize Pete and give him these really interesting kind of emotional arcs. I found myself here at the end of season 2, like much more invested in Pete than I did at the end of season 1. I wouldn't say I like him, but I definitely am much more interested in what happens.
Yeah, it's like, I don't like the things Pete does, but I love his character. Like, and by character, I don't mean like moral character. I mean just like who he is in this story. I just think he's fascinating. He's just such a fascinating person, because he's such a like typical example of somebody who kind of is like fake it till you make it, but in terms of being a decent person, like he just has these moments of like being loyal, just randomly he does something really good. And I think characters like that are super interesting. He's not a hero. He's not an anti-hero. He's not even really a villain. He's just villainous. It's so interesting to me. But I know Mike, Will, you have a lot of problems with Mike. I know you two don't get along.
With Mike?
With Pete.
Jeez. No, I mean, I think that kind of
what? I know I said Mike. Maybe it's a Freudian slip,
He because you and Will have been beefing, and you were secretly just trying to get that heat off of yourself, my friend. Sorry,
I should do that on purpose, because that would help me a lot. Yeah.
But no, I mean, I think that gets into the stuff that I was talking about before, where it's like, even though I don't think the season overall is stronger than the first one, I do think seeing Pete's character become more complex and mature and be a little bit more, unclear, but also fascinating in that respect is what drives the show. And it makes, obviously that first season, I feel like he's a character that's designed to be like kind of taken down a peg, and that, you know, like he's the one that kind of emboldens Dawn, and that, you know, the audience can kind of like love the hate in that respect. And yeah, now it's a little bit more interesting, and I think that's why the episode where Pete loses his father is one of the strongest from the season. Ironically, it's one of the ones, I think maybe the only one from this season I didn't get to talk about on this podcast when you guys talked about it. But yeah, definitely I think Pete is one of the strongest things about this season, hopefully the show moving forward.
Absolutely. Matthew Weiner has even said that he thinks that Pete really grows up in this episode, and that the reason that's why they put him in a black suit. You see him at the end because it makes him look like older. It makes him look a little bit like he's really gone through a maturing process. And yeah, it's really to see that.
He's also infantized here, I think. Like, I mean, you know, he's still kind of play acting as an adult. And then,
well, it's like therapy, right? It's like reaching into your past, and sort of like that can be infantile. Like when you do go through therapy, right? And that can be a process to maturation, or yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, but it also allows like Peggy to kind of have the upper hand as well, where she like kind of pulls this card out, and, you know, like Pete's still, I feel like, even though he is maturing in a lot of ways, I think he is still like play acting as an adult. And this is that moment where he kind of gets taken down a peg and unknowingly may not even have the standing that he thinks he has as far as like his future position in this company if things are not looking great for Duck in the position that he just got. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say, as you said, that Dawn just kind of gets by with dumb luck in this episode. I do feel like Pete gets the exact opposite treatment. I also kind of was thinking about Weiner's use of the rifle in this episode and these little shots. Right. Because I feel like the rifle, right, if you remember when he brings it to the office, just represents this like fragile masculinity that Pete has, right? Of when he's really leaning into like the fakeness of his character. And you see him in that scene with Peggy. I do that every time.
I did it with Pete frame. Earlier. I called him Petty.
Petty. Well, Pete is petty.
Yeah.
But it's in the frame, but it's off to the side, right? It's like he's trying to put it aside, and he's trying to move on. He wants to be with Peggy. But then I really love the ending shot of him sitting in the dark office, contemplating, still holding it. Which way am I going to go? Like, what is going to happen here? If there even is an office on Monday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I
and
mean,
to that note, that it kind of hits too. This episode was coming out in 2008 during the economic collapse, you know, the financial crisis, and like people watching it in 2008 probably were feeling that extra, you know.
Yeah, and I think that kind of leads into, you know, I think this episode can stay relatable, and I like the Cuban Missile metaphor because, like, I think that's something that was either unintentionally or deliberately in mind as far as like a parallel, but also we can kind of use that as like, you know, like I feel like with millennials and certainly with like generation Alpha and with Gen Z, I feel like there is this kind of sense that like with global warming, you know, making the future so uncertain, there is this kind of emboldened sense of like, I think that is leading to younger generations feeling a little bit more willing to be, you know, maybe selfish or maybe a little bit more kind of like assertive in a way that maybe future generations are, because like, well, we don't know if they're going to like be it tomorrow in that way. Like we don't know like what's going to happen. So I think that is going to bleed into the future in some interesting ways and kind of makes this episode in that respect maybe a little bit more relatable. But yeah, I mean, as far as like last week we were talking about, you know, we didn't really know where things are with Don. Like we know he's not going to commit suicide, but like those final shots of him in the water kind of baptizing himself also has an undercurrent of like a suicidal edge where it's like, you know, he dips his head underwater and he stays underwater for a little longer than comfortable. And it's like, okay, like, you know, he is in a way kind of like committing like a social suicide in the sense like he's abandoning his job, his family, his kids, and maybe even his social standing by, you know, going to California and staying there for an undetermined amount of time.
Which happened a lot back then. Matthew Weiner has also said that like it happens like today, like people in creative work just sort of disappear and no one knows where they are.
But I mean, throughout these last few episodes, Pete's also been kind of doing a similar thing where he's kind of committing like a personal suicide in the sense of like he is kind of wrecking his home life. He's damaging his marriage and he's, you know, kind of allowing himself to, you know, make things harder and more difficult for himself moving forward. and also in the sense that like now his like job standing is less clear. He is kind of committing like a personal sort of suicide in that respect. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think that kind of bleeds into that final kind of haunting image there.
Do you think that Peggy is tempted to get with Pete, or do you think that like it's not even doesn't even cross her mind?
I think not in that moment, because she could never be with Pete knowing about the baby, and she had to tell him about it, and she had to leave him with that information. And maybe there's a future there if there's still interest on Pete's side, but I don't think she could have ever done it without talking about the baby.
Same. It's just like, I think that for her, it's like way too late. And like, she is just not that person anymore. She's not the person who had a thing for Pete anymore. And like, I think this guy has just really gotten under her skin in the wrong ways since. And I just genuinely think she's just like, forget it. Like, this guy broke her heart, and she's just never going to go back there.
Yep. Used goods.
Wow.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's reinforced by her being like, oh, I could have had you. You know, she could have shamed him into being with her, and she already made that decision. You know, I think that's like the point of it. She's just like, yeah, I could have.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I've had the power in this. I could have been the one to do this. It's kind of interesting how their rules are sort of like reversed in the same way that Betty and Don's rules are reversed in this episode when he's with the kids and she's at the bar.
Yeah.
And it's interesting.
Yeah, and it also proves that she's really taken Dawn's words to heart when he visited her in the hospital in that flashback we saw, where he's like, you know, he's allowed herself to kind of let go of that and forget about it in some respect. And yeah, like we don't really know like if she'll ever reconnect with that kid in any way, and she hasn't really seen the care, because it's like, you know, she let that part of her life go, and it's easier than she thought maybe it would ever be.
Why do you think Betty, after she sleeps with another guy, she's at the bar doing that stuff, why do you think they then shoot her at home at the fridge eating a drumstick?
I think it's role reversal. That's Dawn.
How so?
Right?
Yeah, you did it. You answered correctly. I guess
what
that
do I win?
You win my respect. It's been a while.
Nice.
No, yeah, she's being done. She's just like, so this is what it's like. She's like, it's Betty. We know that she likes to play house. She likes to set up artifices. You know, she just wants to be in his shoes. And she's like, this is what he would do. He would go to the bar, do that stuff, sleep with a handsome man. And she's like, wait a minute. Yeah, sure. She slept with some handsome man, and then goes to the fridge and then eats her wife's food. And, you know, Will's kind of grinning a little bit. What's going on in that head of yours, Will Ashton?
I mean, I just think it's like kind of funny because it's like in her mind that is true. Like that is like what Dawn is, but also like she knows so little about Dawn that it's like the idea of like, yeah, and he would just eat a piece of chicken in the middle of the night without caring. And it's like, you know, it's like kind of cute in a way. It's like, you know, it's like, yeah, I mean, I guess, but I mean, that's also like not even like the most salacious thing he would do, you know, but then her mind is just like, yeah, he's going to eat chicken, as he's not going to care about how it's going to mess up his figure.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I've been really trying to find the right transition to talk about this, and I don't think there is one, so I'm just going to bring it up.
Sally Draper's lisp when she asked for room service. Yeah.
I trust me, I do not pay attention to Sally fucking Draper.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Fucking boo. No.
Wow.
The worst line delivery in all of Mad Men happens in this episode.
Oh, which one?
When the bartender opens up the office and goes, "What are you guys doing in here?"
No, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
It's so bad.
Because it is really awkward, because it's like, you know, right? Like you've been savvy this entire set of scenes. He's like, that man bought you a drink. I guess you know what that means. Yeah, it is weird.
Yeah, I was curious.
You know that poor...
Yeah.
That poor LA actor, like, told all of his friends and family, like, Mom, Dad, I did it.
I made it.
Mad Men.
Smooth sailing from here on forward. I'm in the big leagues. I'm with the big dogs, you know. Where's Miami? I'll collect it, you know, in a matter of months. And then, yeah. I was curious about that, too. Like, why they didn't, like, do that again. If that was just, like, Matthew Weiner's inexperience as a director or whatever. Like, yeah, it was just an odd choice to kind of leave, clearly a kind of wonky line delivery in that, or if it was just like, yeah, we don't have time to reshoot it. It's good enough, They could have clearly like ADR'd that too. Like it's like,
yeah.
I also think it's kind of weird. Maybe it was my TV. Did any of you notice the scene, Peggy's last scene, where she does the Hail Mary?
It's slowed down, yeah.
Yes, it's slowed down.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so weird. It really threw me. I just like, why?
I think I
didn't even notice that.
Oh, really? No, I definitely noticed that. I think they just needed longer coverage than they got. So they just kind of slowed it down to like, for that montage. And I guess like, I don't know why they just didn't film more footage of her sleeping, or I don't know. It's weird.
Fair enough. Speaking of that ending montage, I thought it was interesting how it's sort of like, I remember the first time I watched this, I was wondering if it was going to end like The Wheel, and we find out that it's not real, that Dawn and Betty have reconciled, like the whole thing where they're on the couch, and because in The Wheel, that kind of thing sort of happens, but then we find out, no, he's alone. So I thought it was interesting that no, it's happening. This is the end of season 2. This is where we leave Dawn and Betty. I guess they're going to be super happy from here on out. Everything's going to work out, right?
And that's clearly what I picked up, because it was that is the American family. Mom, dad on the couch, kids watching TV, no political crisis is happening.
Matthew Weiner has said that the last thing he wrote in the script was them holding hands, and then everything else that happens after that, they were just doing on their own. They just kept the cameras rolling, and then that's what they got. And that's about all I have, guys. Was there anything else you read into the episode? I mean, there is Duck. We forgot to talk about Duck more specifically. I'm not done.
Yeah, let's go over the whole takeover. And because we also have, the 4 horsemen of the office also trying to figure out what's happening. They pull Lois in, and she has a great line of getting out of the switchboard.
Yeah, I thought all that was fine. I just was a little bit like, man, these guys are behind. I don't care. Go to the more interesting stuff. I want to see more Dawn and Roger. Like Dawn's whole meeting with Roger, and he's just like, I'll stack up my absences against yours every day. Again, something else he probably rehearsed on the plane. But what did you want to bring up there? Was there anything about the takeover that you thought was interesting? Because I'm ready to talk about the whole meeting with Duck.
As somebody who has been a part of multiple companies that have been acquired, I thought it was just fully, because I'm that guy.
You're the lowest.
Know what's happening.
You're the lowest. So people like drag you out of your closet, and they're just like, Mike, what's the scoop? See.
See, like, well, I don't know if you actually know that about me, John. I am kind of known as a scuttlebutt around the office.
Really? No,
that's
kidding.
Real.
Mike the Gossip, huh? Gossip Girl is your nickname?
Yeah, that's what they call me. Go Piss Girl. But I just think it's really fun. Not fun, but just like I just saw so much of myself in that. And first guessing wrong about what's happening, but being so sure about it. Of like, oh yeah, it's an LA office. It's for sure an LA office. Yeah. But then being so condescending also to Lois, where he's like, did they talk about combining? And she's like, yeah, it's a merger.
Which is kind of funny when like, by the way, happy to see Lois still in the show, right? Will, I know you're a fan, and you probably weren't sure if we'd be getting her back. Also, Will, is that a Sopranos shirt?
It is, yeah, my Gabagool shirt.
No wonder you mentioned Sopranos earlier. Okay.
Gabagool. It's what's for dinner. Or no, wait, sorry. That's my roommate's shirt. It's Gabagool over here. Yeah, it's that scene in comic form.
But yeah, Lois, your friend, your ally.
Yeah, I like Lois. It's been a while. When's the last time we saw her? Was it the first episode of the season?
When she got fired by Dawn, which is not the first episode.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That was like the second or third one or something like that. Yeah,
that was the one where the Utz episode with Jimmy Barrett is introduced. Yeah. The benefactor, I think.
Oh yeah. So it later in the season than I recalled. But yeah, no, it's good to see her. I mean, I feel bad for her. I don't know if she's ever going to get out of that switchboard again. But I'm happy that she's happy and she has maybe the false hope or maybe the real hope. I have no idea. I don't know.
Don't say anything, Mike.
Yeah.
No, we're just going to be coy about it, Will.
I did. I mean, yeah, I don't know if there's too much more to say about Ken and Saul and the gang. But I did love that one shot.
Who's Saul?
That one shot of, them fixing the TV and, like they turn like 1, 2, 3, like Saul pops his head up just as the other guys do.
Sal.
It's Sal.
Sorry.
It's not Salvatore.
Sorry.
It's Leviosa.
Yeah. I was thinking of Better Call Saul.
And he likes women.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead, Will.
I really like that shot where they're fixing the TV and they all pop their heads up. That was fun.
It's a good line too of like, I hope the Russians have you building their missiles.
So we do have the scene where Dawn is in the office, and I love this scene a lot, where he doesn't even have to say anything really. He's just sort of like, yeah, sure, you can do this if you want. I quit, but see ya. And like that's all he has to do, because like I think Weiner has said it's like, oh yeah, you expect that Dawn is going to do this big speech, but he just has to let Duck be Duck, because he knows Duck so well. I don't know if he knows that Duck has been drinking, right? I mean, he has probably a hint because Roger mentions that Duck ran into the guy at a bar. Dawn's a little bit like, Duck was in a bar,
right?
And so like he might kind of realize, like he might even like kind of size Duck up. And he has Pete to thank too, because if it wasn't for Pete, he wouldn't have had the time to prepare for this situation. If he was caught off guard, who knows how this all would have gone down, right?
Yeah, and I also love, speaking of which, that Duck is like, oh well, like you didn't prepare me, but he like has this very like prepared speech that he gives and all that. I thought that was a fun Duck moment.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting how like Duck in general, like the way that he and we talked about this a few episodes ago. It's like drinking gives him like more confidence. It actually does help him.
It's his
and
finish.
So like it's nuanced. Yeah, exactly. And it's nuanced in how like sometimes when TV shows depict like alcoholism, they just sort of like really like overplay the downsides, but they don't really get into like what motivates people, like why they do it, except for like usually we see it's like, oh, because it numbs pain. And that's usually the go-to. I like how this is that rare show where they're like, there is another aspect to it in this case. It's not really for Duck like numbing pain. It's that he like kind of like loses his filter, which helps him, be a little bit more assertive. But obviously, like he can't control it because the issue that he has with Dawn is not a rational one. He is like threatened by Dawn. He like has a personal issue with Dawn, and it gets in the way of his professional career. And so it's like history repeating itself with what clearly happened with Y&R and how Duck lost his job, or I guess quit or did whatever. It's kind of ambiguous, isn't it? We know that Duck is someone to lie quite a bit and try to cover up the truth to make himself look better.
Right. I also think it makes him cockier. Like previously when he started drinking again
and arrogant.
Right. But like previously when he was starting to drink again, like he had like the lifesaver that he was like trying to be a little bit more coy about it. But now it just seems like he door is wide open when Pete comes in. He's just, drinking like, nobody's business. I'm sorry they can even smell it on the guy now. Like he just, he doesn't care. He's like, I'm going to be the new president. So suck it.
It makes you wonder. It's like without alcohol, he kind of sucks as a businessman. With alcohol, he's even worse. What does a guy like that do? Therapy? That's a start.
Well, I have a friend who, I mean, this not to get too personal, but he struggles with the same thing. And what really helped him was he got a dog. And it's just, that sense of responsibility for another thing, taking care of it, making sure you don't let it loose into the streets of New York. It just found it to be really helpful.
Yeah, I'm glad your friend didn't do that, because, I mean, it honestly is like also kind of indicative of his issues, is that like he could have a sort of like something in his personal life to make himself feel better about his life. Chauncey was right there to kind of boost him, to kind of be the thing that like now that his kids have kind of grown up and they don't care about him anymore, he had that dog. But when it came down to it, he made the choice that he just did not want that because he was too afraid of his past. And so that's actually like, I know, Mike, you're just being a goof and fun and everybody loves you, but also you made a really like, you're like Don, you kind of made a really good point by accident. Well done.
I'm also a 5.4 man.
I think you win this episode. You beat Will and me in this episode's analysis.
Yeah, I will say in that regard, I am disappointed that, in that montage, and I like this episode brought back a lot of the characters that we haven't seen before. You know, it was kind of a reunion in some respects. But I really think they should have had that one shot where we see some random apartment and we don't really know who it is, but we see a guy, you know, coming in with a big bag of groceries. He walks into his apartment. There's a baby there and a loving wife. And, you know, it's like, oh, like, I don't know who this is, but I'm pretty sure this is the baby that, you know, Peggy let go. And it's nice to see that the baby's been adopted by a loving, caring family. Oh, what's this? They also have a little Labrador. Chauncey's a part of the family too.
I thought you were going to say Chauncey was the dad.
Oh, that would have been good too. Well, we just see him
like
from
Chauncey
behind.
was the one with the groceries, or like Chauncey was the one married to the man, and then
top dog,
And then you slowly pan out, and they actually are across the hall neighbors from Peggy.
Yeah.
Wow. They're going to help Peggy with her next pitch. All I have left is trivia. Did you guys have anything though?
I mean, I was going to say, you know, like Peggy comes home, her neighbor's just like, oh, have you met the new guys? Oh, no, I haven't. Let's just say he's a little rough. And then, you know, you hear, you know,
rough around the edges.
Yeah.
But now they, you know what they renamed the dog? Duck.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. I like that a lot. Again, Mike, you're just killing it. You're gone for 2 weeks. You come back and you're just like, you know, again, you're like Don. You're just like winning these meetings.
Allow me to dethrone myself, because even though I've seen this episode, I think this is like my 5th or 6th time, a part of me really wanted them to go with the X-Men First Class Cuban Missile Crisis timeline. Like just one line about, this random British guy stopped everything. It's
yeah. And this guy who controls metal, we think he's a Holocaust survivor, but we don't know for sure yet.
An Oscar winner Jennifer Lawrence was there. I don't know.
New headcanon that did happen, and that was Chauncey. Chauncey stopped the Cuban Missile Crisis.
All right. Well, you're overplaying the Chauncey bit a little bit. Let's get into trivia.
Mike still likes it.
That's good.
Will's about to start a new podcast. It ain't Chauncey till it's Chauncey.
There you go. Let's get into trivia. So one thing Weiner has said about this episode is that, I know I've said a lot of things he said about this episode, but when we see Father Gill doing the church service, that's meant to be an emergency church service. So around this time, the newspapers would be like, when people were like really panicking about the Cuban Missile Crisis, they were going to church like in the middle of the week. So that's kind of why that happens and the way it happens. This episode won an Emmy for Outstanding Writing for a Drama Series, and Elizabeth Moss was nominated for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Drama Series. And the shot of Betty walking in front of the mannequins, it's kind of like halfway through the episode, I think. That was the last scene they shot for the entire season, which I think is kind of astute. And this one I find kind of interesting. So John Hamm's voiceover when he's reading the letter to Betty was recorded in a stairwell. It sounds kind of weird. It's like, why did they do it that way? Because like, I don't remember, like it does, I guess, kind of sound like the voiceover has a little bit of a reverb, but I just thought that was a weird touch. It's like, I don't understand exactly why they did that creatively. Well, maybe just like they like the effect.
It makes it sound more distant, right?
Does it?
I think so. I mean,
I have to listen again. I don't know. I guess.
I think maybe artistically it adds to the fact that Don could have done it a little bit better, or could have been a little bit
see, I like that. Yeah,
put
there
into
you go,
it.
Mike. Yeah. It's like, it's kind of rough around the edges, a little bit like Chauncey, but in this case, it's like, yeah, he's kind of half-assing it.
Don't bring up Chauncey, John. That's not your thing, bro.
Yeah, I got to stay in my lane, right? Or else you guys are going to put me in the doghouse. And then the last thing I had here, I didn't say the ratings. This episode had pretty high ratings. It was viewed by 1.75 million people in its initial airing. And that's one of the highest for the season. So now that we're done with the season, we could say this is the third highest watch episode of the season. Do you guys remember the first and second, though? Curious if you can guess correctly.
Is it Golden? No. Is it 3 Sundays?
It is not 3 Sundays. Actually, that's like that's like the lowest. That's actually the lowest.
Damn. You know what it is? That's my favorite episode of this season.
It's a great episode. It's one of my favorites, so I don't blame you. What's your guess, Will? He's looking on his phone. I think he's cheating.
I'm looking up what all the episodes were. I'm pulling up IMDb.
Oh, so you don't remember the names of the episodes?
Yeah, I don't remember the names because I haven't watched these 5 or 6 times like you guys.
I'm gonna guess. I'm gonna throw out another guess of the very first episode, just since it's the premiere.
There you go. Yeah, that's the highest rated. Sorry, Will, you were too slow.
I think it's gonna be a random one, like the Gold Violin.
No, Gold Violin is up there, but it's not. It's actually the episode right after the Gold Violin. So number 2 is A Night to Remember. And I think we talked about this when we were recording the episode. The reason was because the Emmys were going on during this time for the first season. And so that started to like spark like renewed interest in the show around that time. But we kind of looking forward when we talk about the third season, because that's when the ratings really start to go up for the show across, like on average, like it starts to really pick up. I think by the time third season rolls around, like Secret's out. Mad Men is here. Are you guys excited for season 3? I sure am. I'm like ready for like prime Mad Men content, like consistently great episodes.
That's what I was say. I mean, from what you guys have been talking about, it sounds like that's really when it's fully informed.
And it's not even that every episode is a banger necessarily. There's plenty of like episodes that happen where you're just like, oh yeah, it's not the best, but like, man, you get some just great episodes in season 3, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm watching it completely fresh. Like I have, whether you guys believe it or not, I have not seen anything from season 3. I've not watched an episode at a party. I haven't watched it in my youth. I didn't.
You've probably seen stills though from like Twitter because you.
Yeah, sure, this is definitely the most memed season, right?
I think the most memed season is probably seasons like 5 and 6, but that's just a guess.
You're talking about all like the P. Campbell fan cams and stuff that come onto my timeline and stuff.
Yeah, you keep sharing stuff, and I'm just like, Will, you're playing with fire. Like you have to have been spoiled on so many things by now.
I don't watch and read most of them. I just see Mad Men related. I just copy and paste them, and I just put them on your timeline.
So you claim?
Yeah, that's the truth.
All right, we'll be back next week to talk about season 3, episode 1, Out of Town, which I'm gonna watch it immediately, but you don't have to if you're listening to the show. You have some time, so. For all of you listening, thank you so much for sticking with us for season 2. I know it's been a tumultuous season trying to get through it with all of our traveling and conflicts and everything, but we're making it through it. I'm happy about that for sure.
Our traveling?
Well, yeah, me and Mike.
I'll stack my absence up against yours, John. Any day.
There it is.
Well, not absences from the podcast.
Yeah.
Absences from the country, sure. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you on the next one.